I mean, how could it go any other way but good? Famous last words?
What if our public speaking skills are terrible and it's awkward and terrible?
And nobody cares about that. We're so handsome, it doesn't matter.
Okay, now you're just like not even pretending to try with your gaslighting.
It's fine. All right. So, yeah, just quick introductions here. We are starting off a new podcast here. It's less podcasty and more kind of Bible study-y, so to speak. We'll talk about various subjects. We have three people that are going to be, circling in and out. There's Peter and I, obviously, and then a gentleman by the name of Nick will be joining us at times as well, hopefully more frequently, although he's preparing to celebrate his first wedding anniversary, so that's exciting. So we gotta give him some time for that at the very least, right?
Yeah, fair.
So we're calling this, or at least I'm calling it, From Scratch to Scripture. Name subject to change, but that's what we're going with for right now. It kind of highlights where we're at. We're all kind of all at different points in our faith. Like some of us have a lot more fundamental knowledge from our upbringing. Some of us are relatively new, and just like anybody that might stumble across this at some point, like nobody starts knowing everything. And my desire was to get people together that could learn together and maybe help others learn as well, and be a tool to help people, come back to their faith, or learn more about, um, the church, about Jesus, about, about faith. So that's kind of, we're kind of starting at a kind of, and kind of high level right now, maybe not really. So yeah, so Peter is going to be walking us through this week, and he's got some fancy slides for us all to watch. And having proofread at least one of them, I can tell you they're hilarious and spot on.
True. I have put at least a attempt at a meme in most of the slides to make this less dry, hopefully. I got chosen as the guinea pig to start off the first subject of our podcast.
Well, you had the most fascinating subject to talk about.
I had one ready, basically. So let me share this. We'll see how this goes. Okay.
It might take a second to load. There we go.
Okay. So the first topic is what for me is like it says, murder is moral. That's our clickbait title. Basically what it means is we'll be going over the actual philosophical foundations of moral systems, how they can be justified, not just in divine command theory, which is what Christianity obviously uses with God as the basis, but also like atheistic ones, or at least their attempts at it, which, ultimately, spoiler alert, will be unfounded. And then the subtitle here, the alliterative abridged assembly of arguments and apologetics that affirm the truth of Christianity. For me, this is kind of like a crash course speed run through a lot of things that I've researched and learned over my, brief lifetime, because I grew up with a strong foundation, like Mike alluded to earlier, in Christianity. Grew up in the church, in a Christian family. Had a strong, biblical learning early on. Then sort of, as is fairly common, wasn't as strong in it in my 20s, but then gained with a lot of the arguments and knowledge that I'll be sharing here. It helped basically affirm my belief and my faith in Christianity being the true religion, and just religion in general being necessary. So with that being said, we'll go with my fancy presentation here. So to start off with, this is from the atheist perspective. This is like your classic Reddit tier atheist, where they always say an atheist who doesn't do bad is better or more good person than a theist who simply doesn't do this because their sky daddy told them not to. That's like the classic Reddit tier
Right.
atheist, where basically the idea there is that if you do good simply because someone tells you to do good, and but the atheist does good because they're just a better person, then that means they're a better person because they don't have the threat of, like, hellfire or the sky daddy punishing them if they don't do good.
No, they just have other forms of violence aimed at them, from their brethren or from the government.
Right. Well, I mean, ultimately, even if you take away like government and external sources of force out of it, hopefully I'll show over the course of this presentation that this view is ultimately completely incoherent, mainly because if you dig down at a foundational level, uh, what does good here mean? In fact, my very fancy next part. So here in comes Jordan Peterson and he says, well, what do you mean by bad or better or good, bucko?
I
Apologies for the
like me some
terrible
Jordan Peterson.
apologies for the terrible Jordan Peterson impression. But he does this all the time. He like gets very people always complain about him getting lost in the weeds, being like, well, he just asked for definitions about everything. Well, the reason he
Definitions
does
matter.
well, right, exactly. People are always like, oh, he's all about semantics. Well, if you're, talking about stuff, semantics are important. You need to define what your definitions mean. Like what are
Right. Otherwise, you could be arguing about absolutely different things. If you're not
exactly
if you're not in agreement over what the definitions of the argument are, then nobody wins.
right, exactly. And what we learn here is if we dive into these questions that Jordan just asked, like what is good and also why? Now, what this means is what, that's an is claim, meaning it's just like it's descriptive, not prescriptive. It's just the basic definition. It's not necessarily universal. In fact, it's almost never universal. It's very often proprietary and varies from person to person. So what's good to me is probably isn't good to, some random Joe Schmo on the opposite side of the globe who has a completely different upbringing, religion, and, worldview.
That's not what my dad told me. My dad told me that what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Um, well, I don't know how to exactly. So isn't a gander just is that a duck? What's a gander exactly?
It's also a goose.
Oh, is it like a male goose or something? I'm sure there's a separate definition of what a gander actually is. It's like a specific type of goose.
Yeah, so a gander is a boy goose.
Okay, that's what I thought. It was like a dude goose. Okay, so that statement already is just completely false because, what's good for a goose, maybe it's good for, you know, I guess maybe it's not. I don't know. If something was good for a female goose, it might not be good for a male goose, but I don't know. Either way, we're already lost in the weeds.
Birdshot is not good for either of them. Moving on.
Right. Right. Moving on. So here's the Merriam-Webster definition, at least the section pertaining to morals and ethics, because there's, the definition is like paragraphs long because there's a billion different situations where good can be used. But there's two here. A, something that possesses desirable qualities, promotes success, health, or happiness, or is otherwise beneficial. And B, morally good forces or influences, virtue, morality, integrity. As you can see, these boil down to preferences. And also, I would point out that there's a billion undefined terms in this definition, too. Like morally good, that's, could be subjective especially if you're an atheist. As Christians, we would argue that's not morally subjective, but from the atheist or materialist or secular point of view, it would be. Virtue, morality, integrity, those are all completely subjective from the secularist atheist view, etc. And then we can go with our biblical definition. Here's one, it's in red, so obviously it's Jesus talking from the New King James Version of Mark 10, chapter 10, verse 18. So Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God." Now, this will come up later, and this, I believe, is an extremely good definition, because not only is it describing what is good or who is good, in this case, God, it kind of touches on a whole bunch of things. It describes man's fallen nature, that they're not good, but also it shows that from the Christian perspective, good isn't just good because God says it's good because it's his nature. Like, good and God's nature are intertwined. They're basically the same thing. Uh, there's like common atheistic refutations or arguments against more like Christian ethics, is like they'll say stuff like, well, if God told you, the exact opposite, like if he told you to murder, that murder was good, then would you go out and do that? And this would basically refute that, because God's nature is good. So God isn't going to tell you to do things that are against his nature. And his nature doesn't include murdering things for no reason.
Because God is also, not only is he good, but he's just.
Right. Well, and all of these positive qualities are literally his nature. Like, they are the definition and the source of, positive qualities. So then we get into the why. These are the ought claims. These are the prescriptive claims. And the why is the moral or ethical foundation, and this requires epistemic justification. This is where the philosophy stuff gets in. Otherwise, it can boil down to what you prefer, which is what, atheists and secularists views do. So what the heck is epistemic justification? You're giving the same look, potentially, as the guy at the bottom of the slide. Well, we'll get into that in the next one. But with Christianity, we have divine command theory for what's essentially getting justifying all of this. It's the answer to what is good and why. It's a view that morality is somehow dependent upon God, and that moral obligation consists in obedience to God's commands. But also, like I said, with Christian ethics specifically, moral obligation isn't just in obedience to God's commands, but they're in obedience with God's nature. Like, that's where half of the New Testament is Jesus basically telling you to stop doing wicked things and to become more like him. Like the Orthodox have a view of theosis, where basically you're trying to become as Christ-like as possible, and that's you're going to become more and more good as that happens, because you're going to slough off all the worldly, evil, fallen stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and return to hopefully the best version of ourselves. Let's see. So then we can get into epistemic justification. You'll see who this guy on the bottom right is. It's kind of a meme because he looks funny. But epistemic justification is the rationale, support, evidence, or warrant that turns true belief into knowledge, acting as a crucial component in epistemology to define when a belief is held responsibly or rightly. It addresses why a belief is held, focusing on evidence, reliability, or coherence rather than just pragmatic reasons.
Right. So it's not just I believe just because I believe that this is what I choose to believe. You have evidence supporting your belief.
Right, exactly. Now, this can get pretty deep too, depending on how foundational you want to get. Like the classic, a common joke is the first epistemology and epistemic justification like originates with toddlers, because they ask why to everything. They just keep asking why to every answer you give. That's basically epistemology. You just ask why about everything. Here's a bunch of common ones, or common bases for epistemic justification. Foundationalism, basic beliefs justify other non-basic beliefs. They kind of all boil down to something similar to that. Coherentism is a little different. That one basically is like, if it logically works, then that can be your epistemic justification. That one atheists and secularists will try to use a lot. Internalism and externalism, they're kind of all similar to each other, but internal knowledge, that's like the think therefore I am type of argument. I think, and if I can think, then obviously I exist, and if I exist and am able to obtain knowledge, then I can start verifying things on the outside and kind of work my way outward to externalism. Non-justificationism, this one is basically like we can't justify anything, which a lot of like nihilists and like pure materialist atheists do believe in that. It leads to absurdity and kind of pointlessness, hence nihilism. Basically in that one, but also they can have the view that knowledge can be innocent until proven guilty. Basically, you have to presume everything's false and then try to justify it. It's kind of a backwards, at least to the American judicial system method. Evidentialism, just purely evidence-based. That doesn't work, which we'll get to. Skepticism, knowledge is impossible or undecidable. See David Hume, that's the guy to the right. He was a famous philosopher who he was an atheist. He was a Scottish guy in the 1800s. He basically came to the conclusion that it's impossible to derive an ought from an is. So hence, like you can describe the state of the world with empirical sense data, but you can't actually give any prescriptive claims based off of that. You can't be like, well, because of this, you should do this, because none of that actually matters technically. Basically, there's no moral oughts, is what he kind of came to the conclusion of. And then once he dug deeper on that, he realized that technically you can't justify some very fundamental things. You can't really be sure that your sense data itself is it is accurate. You could just be a brain in a jar. You could be hooked up to the matrix. You could be like the early heretical Gnostics thought. You could be stuck in some like fake evil universe ran by a fake demiurge. And none of this is actually real or matters. You can't be sure of that, so ultimately knowledge is impossible. Obviously, Christian ethics doesn't support any of this. And the reason that all of this stuff is impossible is metaphysics. What the heck are metaphysics? Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that examines the basic structure of reality. It is traditionally seen as the study of mind-independent features of the world, but some theorists view it as an inquiry into the conceptual framework of human understanding. Some philosophers, including Aristotle, designate metaphysics as the first philosophy to suggest that it is more fundamental than other forms of philosophical inquiry. So some examples will give you a better idea of what that is. Concepts like logic, numbers, math, free will, identity over time, language itself, words, because all of these things will have multiple meanings and a lot of them will be non-physical. Like a good example of this that a lot of philosophers in like philosophy 101 classes will do is you'll draw like the number 7 on a chalkboard. There, it's right there. It's physical. It's a number. Now, this represents a bunch of different things. It represents the number. You could draw an equation like 7 plus 7 equals 14. Now it represents words, math, logic. It represents all of these things. And it's physically on the chalkboard. But then you can take an eraser, erase it off. Do all of these things still exist? Does the number 7 still exist after I just erased it? Well, of course it does. Where is it? Can you touch it? Can you taste it? Can you feel it? You can make representations of it in the physical world, but they don't actually exist in the physical world. These are concepts that are metaphysical. So then the key here is materialism / atheism / secularism has no account for metaphysical concepts. According to their view, these concepts are just as invalid as God. All they are is just chemical reactions that make you think like these things exist, but it's all just a grand illusion. You don't have free will. Those numbers don't exist. These are just chemical reactions firing off in your brain that somehow randomly evolved. Uh, so they can't actually account for anything that isn't purely physical, which becomes absurdist. Like, if free will doesn't exist, what's the point of any of this? Like, you can't actually
Right.
have a rational conversation with someone like that because they're like, well, by their own view, they're just sort of randomly blathering and doing whatever the chemical, like, meat robot is
Right.
programmed to do randomly. So, what's the point? Um, so the Christian version of this, and here's an account that kind of points out the absurdity of this. A verse I like, or a section I like from Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. I argue that, I mean, this is a lot of things. Like, he shows himself and through many different ways, through just your sense of consciousness, most people except for sociopaths, arguably, and they probably do too. You have a feeling of having a conscience. You feel bad when you do bad things typically. Um, and then there's, metaphysical things, I would argue, are more proofs. Just existence in the first place is a pretty big proof, and then on top of that, the Bible and everything else. Then, anyways, I'll continue. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. That right there, verse 20, is like the linchpin, in my opinion. Invisible attributes, I think, definitely includes metaphysics. All these metaphysical concepts, they're invisible attributes. They're not physically in our dimension, but they clearly exist. And everybody knows they exist when we talk, when we communicate, when we think. These are clearly these invisible attributes which we're aware of, which we can't, act in the world without using,
Mhm.
you know,
But
atheists
we
and
just kind of
secular.
break it down with science.
Right. When, ultimately that's foolhardy. Because they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. So essentially, they try to explain all this stuff with science and with their own power, and it leads to ridiculous theories that clearly don't work.
And there's been a plethora of theories that have been, that people have come up with since the dawn of thinking that have been debunked over and over and over and over again. Um, and so, if nothing else, that shows us that just because something was scientific, it doesn't make it right.
Right. At one point, they thought the Earth was flat. Some people still think that
Right. Yeah.
somehow.
I mean, there are some amazing things that we can do with science, like, tracking down like our genetics and, just the human genome and mapping and that stuff's cool. Um, and we got that stuff figured out fairly well that we can kind of, like the 23andMe type stuff, we can kind of figure out where our ancestors came up and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's not that science is always wrong, but it is certainly often wrong and rehashed and
Science fails at a foundational level. Whenever, like, when they try to tell you where stuff came from, what the source of everything is, it fails time and time again there. It can definitely be used to do practical things and to tell us a lot. But, if you try to figure out that where the universe came from, it can't help you there. Okay, so then we get into what all this means for moral and ethical systems. And then we have basically the secular attitude summed up in the meme on the right. You shot me when I specifically asked you not to. That's basically it. It's all preference based. So, secular morality is the aspect of philosophy that deals with morality outside of religious traditions. Modern examples include humanism, free thinking, and most versions of consequentialism. These are
Which if you look at all of these, where did they come from, Peter? Where did their morals come from? Western society as a whole.
Well, humanism basically just takes Christian ethics for the most part. They obviously vary in some very important aspects, like not murdering babies and things like that. But they take like 90% of Christian ethics, and then they just try to remove the Christian part out and
Right.
claim that they're doing it for the common good. And then if you ask them why something's good, then they just give you a bunch of like fallacies.
Right. I mean, 90%, or let's take it down maybe a notch. 80% of morality in the West is based upon Christian principles. And that, so like everybody that thinks that they're just morally superior because they're just that much better. No, they, as Shapiro said at one point in time, they were just born on third base. They just, you know, their morality was already built for them.
Yeah. If you look at like all the society, like in the early Christian history, when the Christian societies were running up against all of these pagan societies and all of these, or even earlier than that, if you look at the early Israelites before Christianity even existed, when it was still Judaism, before Jesus was born. You have the Israelites wandering through the lands and basically God telling them, you have to, take out, you can't consort with any of these other peoples. You can't take any of them as your wives because they're going to turn you away from me because they're worshiping demons that do ridiculously evil things like, pass their babies through a ring of fire to Moloch and stuff like that. Like there is like the levels of morality for those early pagan nations compared to the West today is completely, it's night and day difference.
Right. Anyway, sorry for sidetracking.
That's fine. Um, but yeah, like consequentialism is kind of like basically nothing matters except the consequences. So if you do a math equation completely wrong, but you get the right answer, then ultimately that's still fine. It's still good.
It's
That one,
also how again, it's kind of like toddlers again, right? Like they don't understand the principles quite of right and wrong, but they certainly know when you say no and they do it anyways that there's going to be a consequence of some sort. They're going to have to sit in time out or whatever the case may be, right? So, I
yeah,
mean,
consequentialism is definitely it's like you said with toddlers, it's trying to get to the right destination without really caring about any of the journey. You don't really care if like the people have any idea why any of this matters, because ultimately in secular view, like the why doesn't matter because nothing matters. You just care about the ultimate outcome, the ultimate consequences. And free thinking is just kind of some hippie crap. Like that's just like, I'm not bound by your common morality or your they're basically a bunch of like hippies and hipsters. They don't want to think like everyone else. They don't want to have the same morals of everyone else. So they just sort of like do what they want. Which if you look into occultism like Aleister Crowley or stuff like that, like his like satanic religion, Thelema, like the law of it was do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. That's kind of like free thinking. So it's kind of like ultimately a satanic view. Okay. So it's all arbitrary. It's all ad hoc. It boils down to I prefer X for whatever reason. Christian ethics on the counter is the study and application of moral principles derived from the Christian faith, focusing on a loving God and neighbor, following Christ's commands and pursuing holiness. It is grounded in scripture, the teachings of Jesus, and guided by the Holy Spirit to transform character and actions. And because I would argue these, they're more precise in both grounding and definitions than generic divine command theory, which addresses a lot of common criticisms of generic divine command theory. Like I mentioned earlier, people like secularists will be like, well, what if, you're just not murdering because your sky daddy told you not to murder? What if he told you to murder? You would do it, wouldn't you? And it's like, well, it's based in the specific God with these specific teachings, and you're trying to, follow these precepts, and all of these things are also divined in his nature. It is not in his nature to do these evil things that you're claiming. It also kind of addresses like I forget what the type of question it's, or the type of concept it's called, but it's like could God make a stone so heavy even he couldn't lift it? Those type of like
Right.
hypothetical questions. Like it's not in his nature to do things that would counter himself, so it would never happen. So it's not really an issue from that view.
It's very speculative.
Right. So now you might ask yourself, so these things you've gone over, they do show that religion is kind of needed to have a basis for a moral system, for an ethical system. Like secularism, atheism, you've won me over. I now agree with you that they're not coherent. They don't have any justification or base foundation. But what about other religions? Like Christianity isn't the only religion out there, and that's true. There's a lot of various things that I would argue with being, or that would argue for Christianity being superior to them all, and we can kind of go through a few of them. And even the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is more justified than atheism, which is kind of hilarious and ironic. Let's see. So first of all, I would say God as the justification and the foundation automatically refutes pantheism. So all pantheistic religions, they have the same issues that secularism and atheism have. Their ultimate justification and foundation is incoherent, because you can't have like multiple gods with the same power that, are all contradictory and fighting each other, and the source of everything. That just is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. So all pantheistic religions are automatically just yeeted out of the conversation. You don't even have to really address them past that. So that pretty much just leaves us with the monotheistic religions. There's like Zoroastrianism, although to be fair, I don't know as much about Zoroastrianism. It's like an ancient Iranian religion. It's basically the religion that was in Iran for like thousands of years until Islam showed up and like killed all the Zoroastrians.
So like Persian?
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
like Iranian/Persian religion. It's kind of not quite clear if it actually was monotheistic. There was like one creator god, but like he was like fighting various other deities. It had some Eastern philosophies of like dualism and the yin and the yang, like the balance between the light and the dark. So there was like a good deity, and then there's like an evil deity that we're always fighting, but the good deity was supposed to be the basis of everything. So it was kind of monotheistic, but there was like some pantheism and like Eastern dualism themes in there too. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't really know a ton of as much about Zoroastrianism as most of the other religions, most of the other
I don't think
monotheistic
you're
ones,
alone in that.
right? That would actually lead me to one of my criticisms. Like, there's like very few Zoroastrianists like around still today. It's basically like the Iranians who fled when Islam took over. Like, so there's like a diaspora, like a
And fair.
right. I'm not, blaming them for that. I would have fled too. Now, what they should have done, and what a lot of them I'm sure did do, is you flee and then you convert to Christianity because it's better. But, there are a handful still out there that are still Zoroastrians. I don't really, but one of my chief arguments against it would just be that if Zoroastrianism was the true religion, it would probably be a lot more popular than it actually is. Like there's literally like less than, I want to say less than 100,000 adherents to it today, which is like a tiny proportion. So, and I'm sure if I knew more about it, I could find a ton of inconsistencies with it beyond that that would, make it less coherent.
Well,
But
it's less than, you know, a fractal of a percent.
yeah, it's pretty small. This one, Platonic slash Neoplatonic monism. This one's almost not even really technically. I mean, it kind of is religion, but it's like equal parts religion and like kind of just philosophical concepts. Basically, Platonism was the view that like there's like these elemental, like these base elements, which kind of the rest of physical things and the universe kind of emitted from, which is kind of like a different word for God, anyways. But they thought like the first element, the monad, was like the source of everything. So essentially, it kind of was God, but then they got a bunch of weird stuff in there afterwards that makes it very different from Christianity, which we won't get
Hmm.
into. But there are people who have a lot of Platonic and Neoplatonic views, and monism is definitely a thing that some people still uh claim to believe. But usually this is like something that the only real orthodox adherents to are probably going to be guys who have just like smoked a whole bowl of weed and are like, man, are we all just like one? We're not separate people. We're all just one, man. It's kind of that thinking. There's not really a ton of like actual like strict Platonic or Neoplatonic monists around. Islam, that'd be one of the big two in like the actual, because there's really, let's be real, it's Islam and Judaism are the only two that are
Right.
really vying against Christianity. Um, Islam is definitely the weaker of the two. Like the Quran and the Hadiths are just filled. Like I don't like a good reason why Islam is as popular as it is because there weren't a whole lot of actual like literate people in early Islam. And by the time like they actually had Korans available and enough people literate to read them all, they had come up with doctrines like abrogation to explain, to attempt to explain away a lot of the inconsistencies and ridiculousness of Islam. Uh, I mean, we can look at a billion different reasons why Islam is bad. Uh, I would argue that like the internal conscious of like seeing them just, commit terror attacks and do all the evil things they do. That's one. The Quran being horribly inconsistent and them having to come up with abrogation. And abrogation is basically the concept of when you're reading the Quran, if you read a passage and then later on you read another passage which contradicts the first passage, you're supposed to go with whichever came later. Like when two parts of the book contradict each other, you just go with whatever the latest one is. It's like it's kind of hilarious that people buy that. Um,
Unlike the Bible, which is like, did you ever see that? I don't know where the image came from, but Jordan Peterson, speaking of him, he actually did like um, a big like, I don't even know what you call it, presentation, I guess, where they have a graphic of all the times that the Bible like refers to itself in like in like a hyperlink way, and his claim is that the Bible is the first hyperlinked text. There's like thousands of pointers that go from section to section that just back each other up or refer back and forth. um and the graphic, if you've never seen it, you should go and see if you can find it. It's pretty cool.
I haven't seen that specifically, but yeah, the Bible definitely refers to itself a lot. They will quote previous scriptures. They'll quote previous texts. Jesus does that a lot in the New Testament. He'll quote the Old Testament all the time when giving sermons or teaching
Mhm.
people. Um, and there will definitely be secularists and atheists who will try to make the claim that it contradicts itself too. Usually it's with like showing old, like the meme is, or like the common argument from their end is usually something like the Old Testament God is like the super angry,
Mhm.
vengeful God who's just having the Israelites murder everyone, and he's like telling the Israelites to murder their children and blah blah blah. And then the New Testament God is like the hippie God who's all peace and love and stuff. Neither one is strictly true. There's a lot of stuff in the Old Testament which is explained in the context of it. Why, like I said earlier, half the time, most of the time, when the Israelites were coming up on some new nation, and he told them that they needed to conquer the nation, that's because it was a nation literally engaging in demon worship and doing horrible
Mhm.
things like child sacrifice and worshiping gods like Moloch and Baal, like just evil demon deities that were like having their people do horrible things. And he just didn't want the Israelites to be tainted by that, which, by the way, it happened all the time too. They ignored him constantly and did get corrupted by idolatry worship and all that stuff too.
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll get into that at a later point.
Right.
So, but my point is he had very good reasoning for what he told the Israelites to do in the Old Testament. He was not, this just like vengeful, evil, like demiurge Gnostic type, uh, you know, depiction of a deity that they try to paint them with.
Right. Well, and I think part of that boils like one of the examples that I've heard is like, why would they command, or why would God command Abraham to sacrifice his only son? And it's like, well, to prove worthiness, essentially. I mean, God provided a lamb substitute, because he didn't want him to sacrifice his son. It was just like,
Right. And he
do what
sent
I
an
tell you to
angel.
do.
Yeah. And he sent an angel to stop him to make sure that it wouldn't actually lead to the death of the kid.
Right.
Um, but yeah, Islam, terrible religion in my opinion. Has a ton of contradictions. It's just as much a guidebook about how to uh, conquer nations and implement like political world domination as it is an actual religion. There's things that Muslims will claim don't exist, like abrogation and taqiyya, which is the doctrine that you're able to lie at will to people who aren't Islamic, like other religions. You can just say whatever you want to them, and it's fine. Um, there's obviously there's terror attacks. There's like genital mutilation for the women. Like there's just all kinds of terrible, terrible, terrible things with Islam. So all in completeness, completely reject that as the true religion. That one can't be it. Also, Muhammad, their prophet,
Wow. Yeah. Really? Like
warlord, pedophile.
right, exactly. I'm gonna marry a 9-year-old.
Also, he was a dumbass. He was a complete moron. Like, he's a
Well,
horrible,
that's why Satan was able to pose as an angel and convince him otherwise.
right? Um, I actually saw there's a whole bunch of cults, including Islam, that have been started when their founder, like Muhammad or Joseph Smith or people like that, claim to have like talked with angels. So I'm just saying a lot of cults may have been started by demons pretending to be, well, I guess they're fallen angels, but yeah, Muhammad is like literally a warlord pedophile. Like he was an awful, awful person and a moron. He died because he killed there's a Jewish woman. He killed her whole family and he had her as a slave, and he let her prepare his food, so she poisoned him, and then he died from the poison. Like, what a moron. He didn't even have a food tester.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then the last one is Judaism. That's obviously going to be the most coherent of all of the alternate ones because, like, up until Jesus, it was the same as Christianity. It was the same. Old Testament God is the same God. After Jesus shows up, that's when Judaism, and to be fair, even in the time of Jesus, like right before it in the Second Temple period, um, there's like a whole bunch of different factions. When you read through the Old Testament, he talks about like the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all these different like factions of Judaism. They're already like not so great. They're losing their way. They're way more legalistic and in like say D&D terms, they were rules as written instead of rules as intended. They're using that as loopholes to basically enrich themselves and to be holier than thou. Um, but at least the first part was coherent and the same. But then after Jesus, they reject the Messiah. They think that the Messiah is still coming around. They have all of these Talmuds, which are basically commentaries and teachings, like collections of teachings from rabbis over centuries, which are ridiculously long. Like there's just ridiculously amounts of text written by all these rabbis from the diaspora, like after the Israelite tribes got scattered, um, and there's just a ridiculous amount of not of ridiculous things in there that clearly aren't true. I obviously not as apologetically prepared to refute all of them, but essentially they rejected Jesus and the Messiah and have been wayward ever since. Um, there'd be a bunch of reasons for the coherence of Christianity that we've already covered, but Scripture got the canon of Scripture got established with the Nicene Creed, and then has been extremely consistent ever since then. And then we got stuff like the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we discovered these tablets from the first century. Uh, before the canon of Scripture was even completely established, and they match almost perfectly.
Right. And very, very early first century too, like within 30 years of Jesus being crucified. Are some of the earliest accounts, if I recall correctly. Anywhere from like 30 to 100 years. And there's so many there's so many historical artifacts that point to Jesus's existence and the things that he did. There's just as much supporting him as the fact that Caesar existed, for
There's
instance.
there's more
Yeah,
actually.
it's
There's
just
more accounts of him than
right.
Caesar. Like mainstream, like historians all mainstream historians all agree that Jesus definitely existed. He was definitely a real historical figure. Obviously, where they're going to differ is whether he was divine, whether he was God or not.
Hmm.
Obviously, we believe he was, and I believe there's plenty of evidence for it. More of it would be like the early church because like in the early days of the church, like immediately following Jesus' resurrection, when he set it up, when the Pentecost happened and he sent uh, all the apostles out to start preaching and founding churches. um, Christianity was very much illegal. Like Rome was still the big, they were the empire. They were where, the government of all these different locations that the apostles are going. And essentially Christianity, it becomes illegal. Paul, his original job was to go around and round up the Christians and like report them and arrest them and
Hmm.
bring them to the Romans to have executed. So he knew all about it before he got converted. I'm sure
Hmm.
we'll get into that at some point in greater detail. But like the early church is filled with people getting murdered for their beliefs. And generally, over the long run, uh, there are some examples of fanatical cults that will die for their beliefs, like Jonestown and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But if there's a fanatical cult that dies for their beliefs, it lasts like, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, then everyone's dead and
Right.
it's over. It doesn't last 2000 plus years.
Right.
So, like, the early Christians kept dying for their beliefs and it kept spreading.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. Like I see frequently, you know, if so you look at the apostles and what they underwent to spread the teachings of Christ. If they did not fervently believe that Jesus was the Messiah, there is no way that they would have put themselves through that. It's just you're not going to die uh to torture and execution. You know what I mean? You're not going to do that for a lie. That's something that you don't believe in. And they were the people that were closest to Jesus. So who else would know better than than them,
If it was all a con, then they were the worst con artists known to man because all
for
they
sure.
got all they got for their trouble in terms of worldly gain is executed.
Yeah, in horrific manners.
Yeah. So if like Peter was like if Peter was a con artist, he eventually got crucified upside down after being tortured. So uh and he didn't really have, a ton of worldly wealth before then either. So uh I would say like
But he
so
did what
the
he was supposed to. He became a fisher of men.
right. So for for firsthand accounts and the just the actions of the early church, I think that affirms the truth of Christianity. And then later on, Christianity conquered. Like with Constantine, his mom was a Christian. Uh, he became a Christian. He converted the whole empire. First, he decriminalized Christianity, then he made it the official religion. Um, Christianity, and then we started going around and like converting all the pagans of Europe and everywhere else. So Christianity ultimately did conquer. Where if it was just like a crazy cult, it would have been dead within like 20, 30 years max of Jesus's resurrection if it was just a cult. And then there's other things. There's like a ton of prophecies of Jesus, and those would be a large part of why Judaism, I feel, isn't, true, because there's a whole lot of prophecies in the Old Testament which are confirmed when Jesus is born and is crucified and resurrected. Like, and these are things which you can't like post hoc add back in, like Joseph
Hmm.
Smith did with himself in Genesis. These are things that we have texts before Jesus was born that predict his birth and his
Right.
crucifixion.
Yeah. So like I actually was looking at something the other day about this, and it was like they were talking about, sure, if you knew what the prophecies were, you might be able to manufacture a couple of them, like riding the donkey into Jerusalem and things like that. But in order to match all of the other prophecy that he acted out, it was an absurdly large number. It was like 14 trillion trillion. Like that was the odds. 14 trillion trillion to 1.
Yep. Like that
It,
math, I would say, affirms Christianity. First of all, without Christian ethics, and you don't have the epistemic foundation for math, or even the belief that math can be possible, as I established earlier. But also, there's stuff like that. Yeah, the odds are just impossible for people to exist. If you're an evolutionist, evolution doesn't pass math's muster. Prophecies like Old Testament prophecies are basically impossible to fulfill through Jesus mathematically. Even if you're trying to fake it, it would be pretty difficult to do. Um, yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get into all these things in future
right,
episodes in greater detail, but this was my initial kind of presentation and basically just a quick Cliff Notes version of why I ultimately believe in the truth of Christianity on a
right,
broad basis.
right. And I think in the future you're probably gonna we'll delve a little deeper into some more specifics, like particular subjects, for instance. Cool. All right, yeah. This was pretty cool. Like I knew some of this stuff, and some of it just kind of, you assume things, right? Everybody just kind of assumes things. If you have a certain belief, you sometimes just assume that somebody worked out all the details for you, but you really can't. You have to. That's thinking critically is what will lead you to truth. You can't always just take other people's words for it. Like, don't take our words for it. Like, when we say stuff, go look it up, check it out, see if you agree. And that'll, anything that we talk about here, I encourage you to confirm with your own eyes, with your own hands. You know, do your due diligence. Don't just take people's words for stuff. That's half the reason why I think the world has gotten to a point that it's in, is everybody just assumes that, oh, they've, obviously know more than me. Why should I bother? No, no, take the time. If it's important, it should be important to you too to find the answer.
Well, and also when you're doing that, check primary sources. You can't just like ask an AI, "Is this
Right.
true?"
Right. Yeah. That's
That doesn't
okay.
count as confirming
All right.
stuff.
AI soapbox.
Yeah.
Don't trust AI. It's okay to have AI collate things for you, or do menial tasks and stuff. I mean, that's using a tool to do a job, right? But don't rely on it for knowledge. Let's just say, because it probably gets 90% of its knowledge from Reddit, and they probably don't know what they're talking about either.
Here, I'll quickly spam back to the beginning. This is who you're getting your knowledge from in
Right?
AIs. This guy right here.
It's okay. We can trust the neckbeard and the fedora.
Yeah. They're very trustworthy. Yeah,
Now I need to get a fedora for our next episode.
with AI, it's don't trust and verify. Not trust and
Right.
verify. Don't trust, verify.
We'll do a little spin on Reagan.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's all I had for so far.
All right. Sweet. Well, thank you. I appreciate you talking about that today, and I kind of look forward to what we go over next time. And so with that, we'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Later.
Toodaloo.